What is going on, predators? Today is the day we are going to be preparing for our backcountry elk hunting trip. And today we're going to be doing something. We're going to be making the meals that we take out there on this hunt. So I'm really excited to be doing this because being on the carnivore diet, a lot of these meal options that are out there for hunters and things like that going out in the backcountry don't really suit me, right? Because I'm a carnivore. Does this look better? No. So a lot of these backcountry meal options don't really suit me as a carnivore because they're usually something that's got like pasta or some kind of breading or, you know, just potatoes or something like that in there. And really a lot of times those meals are they're really just trying to get as many calories into your body as possible. And, you know, as far as calories go, one of the easiest ways to get calories in there is through carbohydrates, right? Easy to get that in there, and it's a quick burning fuel that usually works really well for people that are on an average everyday Joe Schmo diet. Now, with me being on the carnivore diet, one thing that I happen to have going on in my body is that I don't really want carbs. I don't, you know, desire carbs, don't crave them, but my body can actually create its own carbohydrates or its own glucose in that sense for my muscles and my brain through a process called gluconeogenesis. I'm not gonna dive into that. I've done some other videos on the carnivore diet and how that works in your body. I'll put some links up here somewhere so you can go check that out. But what we're gonna be doing is we're going to be going in and we're gonna be making pemmican. So pemmican is really interesting. It's been around since before even European settlers came to America, and it's something that the natives used to do to store meat long term. So by rendering all the water out of the meat and rendering all of it out of the fat, what you're gonna do is you're gonna make it to where that doesn't spoil, right? So everybody's heard about beef jerky, you know, and beef jerky can keep a very long time because there's no water in it, and so the bacteria aren't really interested in eating it, so it's not going to spoil. Well, eating just beef jerky all the time is gonna be very hard, right? And it's lacking one of the main things that the body needs whenever you're on a low calorie diet, and that is fat. So how do you replace that fat in your diet? You take beef fat or beef tallow in this case. What I'll use is use the beef tallow, and you're going to render this down and you're going to remove all the water out of it, which is going to make it to where you can basically store that meat inside the fat and have all those calories in there ready for your diet. So I'm not going to go much further. I'm not going to wax poetically about this. If you want another video talking specifically about the history and the science behind pemmican, I'll do that. That'll be kind of interesting. We'll do some research in front of the computer with it, but right now let's go ahead and get into making our pemmican. So for making the pemmican here, a couple things we're gonna need. We are going to need some beef tallow, okay? So I picked this up at my local butcher here. This is about, let's see, this is almost 3 pounds, and this is almost 5 pounds of beef tallow here. This package of it was, the heavier one was $8.80, and this was $5.25. So not very expensive, and this is quite a bit of tallow. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna cube this up, and we're going to render this down so that we can get the good fat of it, and we can get all the meat off of the tallow here. All right, next over here we've got this is a round top roast here. And what we're gonna do with this is we're gonna chop this up in the sections. You see how it's pretty lean. It's got a little bit of marbling on it, but overall this is a pretty lean beef roast. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this and we're going to cut it up, divvy it up, chop it up into small pieces. We're gonna dry it out, and then we're going to process it so it's almost like a fine powder in a sense, right? So it's something that can be really easily formed and into a bar or something like that, okay? And we're gonna chop it and grind it and get this all processed out. And I want to try something else as well. I've actually already got this, which is basically ground meat. This is hamburger, right? It's got a little bit of fat, so this is about 88% lean and 12% fat. And so with this right here, there's another way I'm gonna try. This is an option to do instead of getting a steak or like a roast or something like that and chopping it up. It's obviously, typically, it's perceived as not being as good, but hamburger meat is cheap. It's really easy to get a hold of, so this would be a good option if this works out. I wanna try this because this is already like pre-ground meat instead of just cutting it up and grinding it yourself. Pre-ground, so we're gonna try this and we're gonna see how well this works for a pemmican as well. Some people will add fruits and stuff like that to their pemmican. I'm gonna try a batch with just the meat and the fat, and I'm gonna try another batch with honey in it because, you know, with honey, like I say, it gives you a little bit of carbohydrates, but you know, it's not have all the fiber and stuff that, you know, the fruit has. It's still easily digestible. And, you know, for men, like I say, if you're on the carnivore diet, if you go on the carnivore diet and you stay too low carb too long, it can affect your testosterone. We don't want to have that. So I'm going to try a batch with and a batch without honey. Be kind of like a dessert batch and a regular batch. But anyway, so we're going to test that out, and we're going to get to cutting up the tallow first. All right, so we got everything out here. I'm going to run my knife over the ceramic first. Make sure it's nice and sharp. We're going to get our beef tallow out here. So I've let this thaw just a little bit. I might make sure I wash my hands real good. So this is all just fat. So I'm going to start carving it up. I got Midas over here and he wants some scraps. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just trimming off all the meat. So little chunks like that. That right there is all meat. Pretty much all meat. Midas gets that. Come here, bub. Ready? Yeah. All right, so again, I'm just carving this up. You can use whatever kind of knife you want. I've got this kind of knife too. If it were more frozen, I would use something like this to chop it a little bit better, but I honestly like a really small, sharp knife. I feel like I can work a little bit easier and a little bit safer with it. Looks like Midas, you're about to get a big old chunk of stuff here.
So as the fat is added to the pot here, I'm going to put it on the stove, and I want to put it on a medium heat. I don't want to cook it too hard and too fast. So I just want to make sure that I get it all heated up nice and slow. This is about a couple minutes in, and you can already see that it's got quite a bit of fat coming out of there. This is going to be good. Like I say, I want to keep stirring this and keep moving it around a little bit in the beginning here. I just want to make sure that all of it gets kind of evenly heated. But as it renders out, I'm going to keep stirring it so to make sure that all the pieces are touching the bottom of the pan. And then eventually, whenever we get to a point where the pan is starting to collect a good amount of grease, I'm going to go ahead and do a first draining, and then I'm going to go ahead and pour out the rendered fat that we've gotten so far. This is going to allow me to keep an eye on it, make sure that everything's rendering out properly. So you can see this is a good amount of fat here, so it's time to drain. So in deciding the best approach to get this stuff out of the pot and into my jar here, I decided to first start trying to ladle it, but then I found really fast that this is going to take way too long. So I ended up abandoning that and just go ahead and jumping it over and pouring it into the jar by hand. But as you can see, this is going to make a huge mess because, you know, I don't have a funnel. Hey, I just moved into a new house, don't have all the kitchen tools I need, so hey, give me a break, okay? Roast me in the comments if you really want to. But basically what I found was that whenever I poured it in here, I ended up with a lot of little particles and everything from the bottom of the pan that ended up in the fat. But I'm not too concerned about this because eventually it's all going to settle to the bottom pretty quickly, and it's not going to be an issue at all with this. If you have any big chunks of fat or anything like that that end up in there, you can just use some chopsticks to simply get those big chunks out of there, and it works pretty well.
Next, we're going to get out our beef roast here. And this is a top round. So you can see it's pretty lean. There's not a bunch of fat, it's already been trimmed off. It's got a little bit of marbling in here, but that's going to be just fine with me. So we'll get a sharp blade here. I'm going to be testing out a new sharpener soon, by the way. It's going to be that rolling one. We'll see how it goes, so stay tuned if you want to see how that thing works. Okay. So again, I'm just chopping this up nice and fine. I don't want it to be too thick of chunks because here's my plan is I want to get this to a point where whenever I put it in the grinder that it's not going to be too thick with the meat grinder. And then I've had a few meat grinders in the past and some of them are better than others. Had one that worked okay and it was attached to like a KitchenAid mixer. Wasn't that great though because it would keep coming off the mixer and it was a pain in the ass. So honestly, the meat grinder that I've got now is actually one that was belonged to my grandmother from like 1980s, 1970s, since I was a kid, about as old as I am, and it still works like a freaking champ, man. So again, I'm just chopping this up fine enough, a little bit less than about a half inch. All right, so now I got one of these things broken down, so I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna put this roast back in the fridge for now, and I'm gonna go ahead and go with this one and I'm gonna grind it. I would cut both of these up, but since I'm also going to be using hamburger meat for this as well, just to experiment to see how well it works, I'm going to be just, like I say, running with just this one right now, and I can save this one for later.
All right, so after we've completely rendered all the fat out of there, you can see that you kind of end up with what looks like some little pork cracklings. These little beef fat pieces or little chunks of meat and all that kind of stuff are really good little snack, or you can actually give them to your dog too, man. Midas was absolutely loving these here. So once they stop producing fat, go ahead and take it out, drain all the fat, store it in a jar, and you can either put it in the fridge or just store it on the counter. Now we move on over here to the part where we are grinding the beef. And so this, like I said, little grinder is slow, but it works really good. Like I say, this thing is like from the 1980s or something like that, and it still works like a freaking champ. Love this thing. But any kind of meat grinder will do. And this is just going to process it up. So one thing that's kind of interesting to note is that this grinder will grind it up, and it's actually, versus the hamburger meat, it's a little bit more mealy, I guess you'd call it. But it ended up being a little bit better texture, a little bit, I mean, kind of tougher, I guess you'd call it, but it ended up working out really well. So it wasn't as mushy as the hamburger meat, and it had a little bit more texture, a little bit more, I guess, fibrous, kind of collagenous tissue in it, and so it worked out a little bit better than the pre-ground store-bought hamburger meat.
All right, so there's a couple different options when it comes to dehydrators. One of the ones you've got is this one, like I've used in my beef jerky video, and this is basically just a heated element with a fan on it that will circulate the hot air around it, and you've got different trays and things like that here. These are probably the most inexpensive dehydrators you can purchase on the market, and it basically goes from about 95 to 160, 180 degrees on this dehydrator, and this thing works just great. I've got something new recently though that is a little bit different. So that is this guy over here, and so this dehydrator is a little bit different. So this one basically has doors with trays on it. This thing can cook everything, can do like air frying and whatnot. And it also has a dehydrate function on it. So we're gonna be using this. This is, by the way, the Gourmet brand. I think this was like 90, 99 bucks at Walmart. So we're gonna be using this one right here for some of it. And we're also gonna be using that at the same time. And we're gonna see which one works better. So just a cool little test in this.
So next I want to take out some of these parchment paper sheets and lay this down there. This is going to help keep the meat from falling through the little holes in the grate and everything. It's just going to still allow it to dehydrate properly. And so this is a really nice little thing to do. Just put this on there, and then I'll just go ahead and stick it in there. And also that parchment paper is going to help absorb some of the fat and stuff like that and keep it from dripping all over the dehydrator. So it keeps it dehydrated a little bit cleaner. It will dehydrate a lot faster without this on there, but I felt like it was a nice step to help keep everything clean and you know, also help it to you know, not fall into the grates. I didn't want to waste any of this meat. The dehydrating process is one of those kind of set it and forget it things where you kind of have to just set it up and let it go. So it's not going to happen just overnight. I took about a day and a half or so for this to completely dehydrate on the different types of meat and everything. In the end, they ended up about the same, and they took about the same amount of time to finish dehydrating, but overall I let it set for about a day and a half because you can't over dehydrate these things.
All right, Brother, so now we've got the meat dried out and everything. It's looking really good. Next, what we're gonna do is we're going to process it. So you see what I've got here is I just got a little cheap, I mean, this is literally like a $15 food processor here from Walmart. And this is what our end product needs to look like. So you can see it's really finely chopped and ground. That's gonna make it towards easier to form into bars whenever we put the tallow in there. But right now, this is what it looks like. It's almost like a bark, right? So, kind of, if I had to describe it, kind of looks like hamburger bark. You can hear how dry it is. Let's see if I can get you a snap. I'm gonna put this by the microphone here. So, but yeah, super dry, and so it's gonna blend up really well. Drop it in there and grind it up.
So the process of grinding it up was taking way too long for me. It worked out pretty well, but I was having to add little pieces at a time, so I ended up going to the store and buying a new processor. Funny thing was the meat actually broke the processor, like it couldn't handle it. It overheated the motor, and I had to end up returning this processor and going back to the little guy again. So a note on the processing is that you want to get this as fine as you possibly can. That's why it's important to get it very dry, because that's going to ensure that it doesn't stick to the blades and everything, and it grinds it up kind of like a powder. The more like a powder you can make this, the better your success is going to be. Mine ended up being a bunch of little chunks, and it worked out, but it would have worked out way better had it been much more finely ground. The next step is to add the fat and the honey and anything else that you're putting into the mix there. I poured this in. I just put chunks of fat in there and mixed it with my hands. You could also just pour it in as a liquid, but either way it melts pretty low temperature, so it worked out well. After mixing it all up with my hands, I just spread it on a pan, and then I stuck it in the fridge for about 6 hours. Once it came out of the refrigerator, I ended up with these nice little chunks of bark, like almost like a little granola bar here. So just slid it into some Mylar bags and then vacuum sealed them so that they're nice and airtight, and put that over in the pack so I can take it into the backcountry with me. The flavor of it overall was really good. It was not super sweet. It was not super grainy or gritty or anything like that. Overall, it worked out pretty well. But again, if you get this to a powder, I think everything's going to work out a lot better for you. So we're going to take this on the elk hunt here, and I'm going to show you some video coming up from that soon. Thanks a lot, and as always, guys, keep defying the odds.